Recording has been started.
Good morning, our viewers. Welcome to yet another roundtable discussion from the Council for Strategic Affairs. Today is Saturday, February 12th, 10 a.m. in US and 8:30 p.m. in India. We are going to have an excellent discussion in today's roundtable conference, and we have a number of distinguished experts. So I am starting my PowerPoint, and I think you can see my PowerPoint at this point in time. The topic for today's roundtable discussion is Third Battle of Panipat, Strategic and Military Lessons Learned. I'll give a brief introduction about Council for Strategic Affairs. Council for Strategic Affairs imparts education in the field of international relations. CSA fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness, and CSA aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. We have monthly roundtable discussion on second Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime. We have a monthly distinguished guest lecture by a domain expert. Council for Strategic Affairs also organizes symposia, meetings, and conferences. It promotes publication of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. And more recently, CSA has started an internship program for college students. So, of course, that's the flag of India, and that's the map of India with the borders. And that is another map of India showing some intricacies of LOC and LAC kind of thing. But let me go back to more than 200 years ago. This was the Maratha Empire in 1759.
Yeah.
And let me put this Maratha Empire from 1758. And you see that here is a small Hyderabad Nizam power. You have Delhi and a little bit of Haryana, etc., under the residual of the Mughal Empire. But pretty much pan-India, except of some part of Odisha or Kalinga, and some part in South India, basically Kerala or Trivandrum or Cochin Empire. But if you look, the Maratha power northwards extended up to Peshawar. So that speaks about the actual history of India, because when history is told, it is stated that from Mughal Empire, the power was transferred to the British Empire, as if there was no intervening powers in between. And let me get to this again. High tide of Maratha Empire, telling you the extent of spread actually up to Peshawar. So this is the announcement. It tells you our distinguished speakers, Major General Asthana, General Dhruv Katoch, and Colonel Harjeet Singh. They are the panel members for today's roundtable discussion. Before I actually start the discussion, I will give you some housekeeping rules. And those housekeeping rules are, I would like everyone to mute themselves to avoid noise interference. I would like everyone to change the cell phone setting to vibration mode, because accidentally, if you are not on mute and your cell phone rings, that will cause interference. When our distinguished speakers are speaking, please don't interrupt them. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves will be allowed to pose questions. No anonymous questioners, please. Please send all your questions on the chat function. Please be very precise and specific in asking a question, and please do not send comments in the form of a monologue. We are recording this series, and it will be available within 24 hours on our YouTube channel. So I will start with our first speaker and give a brief introduction. You will see him soon. Retired Major General Shashi Bhushan Asthana. He is currently Chief Instructor at United Service Institution of India at Rautullara Marg in New Delhi. He is on the Governing Council of Confederation of Educational Excellence. He is on the Security Council of International Organization for Educational Development. He is part of International Police Commission India. He is part of United Nations Collaboration for Economic and Social Development in Africa. He has been on advisory board of number of international bodies. He is on expert group Challenges Forum for International Peace in Sweden. He is a very well-known TV and media personality. And this is not the first time he is, participating in CSA program. So he will be our first speaker. Our second speaker, and you will see him soon, is Major General Dhruv Katoch. General Dhruv Katoch is an alumnus of Sherwood College in Nainital. He is, trained at National Defense Academy in Khadagwasla, India, and then National Defense College in New Delhi. He was commissioned to join the Dogra Regiment on March 31st, 1972. He has had a distinguished career spanning 4 decades. He has held instructions assignments in the infantry school in Mao, which is military headquarters of war, the Indian Military Academy in Dehradun, and senior staff appointments at the brigade, division, and corps commander level. He is also a graduate of the Defense Services Staff College in Wellington and the Higher Command course in Mao. He has vast experience in subconventional conflict, having taken part in IPKF operations in Sri Lanka and operations against terrorists and insurgents in Jammu and Kashmir and various states in northeast India. He was commended by the Chief of Army Staff for operations against militants in Sri Lanka and was awarded the Sena Medal while in command of his battalion in active operations on line of control. Major General Dhruv Katoch was also the director of the clause. And actually, in that capacity, I came to know him around 2008 because I was at that time publishing some articles on geopolitics in the clause website. And our last distinguished speaker is Colonel Harjeet Singh. Colonel Harjeet Singh did his early schooling also at Sherwood College in Nainital and then RIMC in Dehradun. He joined the National Defense Academy in January 1966. He was commissioned into the 6th Light Infantry in 1969. During his military career, he had been instructor at IMA Dehradun. After completing the course at DSSC in Wellington, Defense Staff College, he was posted as a brigade major of 2 different infantry brigades at Chandi Mandir and Udaipur. He is author of many articles, monographs, and reports dealing with defense and strategic affairs. He is well known in military circles for his erudition and, analysis. He has written over 50 books, and I could find only a few of them. 12 of them are listed here. And the most interestingly, that he has written a book which is out of print at this point in time, and it's called Cannons versus Elephants, the Battle of Panipat. And I found that private individuals who had very rare copies are trying to sell these books actually for $40 or $50 a piece. So I was surprised how important his books are, and I hope that he sort of, brings a reprint of that particular book. So as you see, we have a very distinguished panel of our retired military personnel who is thinking generals, who are authors, uh, who are talking about strategic issues and geopolitics. So today's roundtable discussion would be an intellectual feast for anyone who is interested in geopolitics. And without further ado, I'm going to invite our first speaker, Major General B Asthana, who will speak to us for a period of 15 minutes. Major General Asthana, it's your.
नहीं पता नहीं क्या हुआ
Dr. Adityanjee, friends from Council of Strategic Affairs, esteemed co-panelists and viewers. It's a pleasure to be speaking on the forum of CSA once more on a contemporary historic topic which is very important to Indians. This is a topic, the third Battle of Panipat and 14th January 1761 is a day which is remembered as darkest day in Indian history. This was the battle where we lost 60 to 70,000 people in a day, 40,000 massacred in cold blood. This was a battle where Indian military still proved that its valor cannot be questioned, the strategy may be wrong, the political dimensions may be wrong, the political choices may be wrong, but the brave soldier, he did what he is supposed to do. This was also a battle which reminds us that united we stand and divided we fall. And we kept doing the same mistake again and again and again. Whether it was Mughals invading us, or Abdali invading us, or later British recapitulating on the same mistake. And today, even others are trying to make use of the same mistake which happened during that period. So therefore, an analysis of this is certainly a important lesson learning process for any analyst and any Indian to remember. And Dr. Adityanjee has done a wonderful job by showing us the map before that. I'm sure the details which he had shared on along with the link, which gives the history in brief, I'm sure everybody would have read it, because I will not go into the sequence of the Battle of Panipat. But just in case, if somebody has not read it, just to put things in context, I'll just take 2 minutes to finish that off. Between 1680 and 1707, 27 years, Mughals got better of Marathas and encroached into their territory. 1707, Aurangzeb died, and thereafter, Marathas grew their empire to the level which he had shown on the map. Once that empire grew to the level what he showed, Abdali's son, who was put along with the Mughals in Delhi, had to run away, and that is what Abdali brought into the battle, because he was threatened by the growing power of Marathas. And then came 1760, where Marathas had even captured Delhi and most of these areas. And then came the Battle of Panipat in 1761. Abdali was on the west side of Yamuna. Marathas captured everything eastern side of Yamuna. But subsequently, the tides turned over, because Marathas thought that he will not be able to cross. He crossed, and then he cut them off from the rest of the India and also Delhi and their supply lines. So thereafter, the tides turned against them, and we lost the battle more a little later. I will come straight. This is a battle which brings a lot of political, strategic, military, and social lessons for all of us. And let me start with the first lesson, the political lesson. As I mentioned, that united we stand. So Abdali built better alliances. From 1759, he started developing his forces as well as alliances. He got Rohillas on this side. At the same time, he also got Najibul Dawla on his side, who was king of Awadh, who did the heavy lifting as far as finances are concerned. And on the other side, Marathas, having achieved the peak of their power from Atak to Katak, got little arrogant and perhaps thought that perhaps others would automatically follow them, which didn't happen. And therefore, there was a little divide. There was synergy which was lost. Sadashiv's arrogance also played a part. Jats were annoyed with him. Couple of others were also got annoyed with him. And he didn't take everybody along. So that's how, that was one issue which did not go in our favor. The second is, Sun Tzu has said that one of the factor is earth. Now when he says earth, it is terrain. The terrain of Panipat is such. And why Panipat? Why all battles in Panipat? Because it is the gateway to Delhi, and it also has a major obstacle in terms of Yamuna, next door. Now, it depends on the strategist how he uses that obstacle. If you use it intelligently, it's a big plus. If you use it, if you lose track of it, then it's a big minus. And as I mentioned, when Abdali got a chance to cross, should he have got a chance to cross at that point of time or not? That is something which we need to think of and deliberate, which I'll cover a little later. Then the next lesson comes from the force composition. You see, Abdali had about 72,000 cavaliers, 32,000 infantry in terms of Rohillas, 80 mounted guns, but the guns were mounted. As far as Marathas are concerned, they had 66,000 cavalry, 9,000 infantry in terms of Gardis, and 200 guns, more in number, but they were fixed guns. So therefore, mobility was suffering. The second important thing was, they were also carrying 2 lakh non-combatants, such a huge logistic load. And therefore, the teeth to tail ratio was atrocious. And they were also going for pilgrims. So managing them and sharing food with them was actually a big load, which an expeditionary force cannot afford. Abdali was also expeditionary, and so were they. So as an expeditionary force, this composition of carrying such a huge administrative load was not desired. The next issue is of capacity building. This battle gives a very important lesson that you have to fight with your own strength. You have to be self-reliant. This lesson is equally applicable today. We can count on so many things. He counted on so many kings that perhaps Holkars will help him out, and Holkars will perhaps exploit the success which he makes. But it didn't happen. So therefore, the strength which you have with yourself, he was also short of finances. The kings didn't help him. So you have to count on your own strength. So that was one more lesson which came up. The next thing is the complacency. Let me put it this way, that after the capture of Delhi, there was a battle of Kunjpura, and Sadashiv, when he won both of the battles, he thought that he has won it. Abdal is on the other side of Yamuna, he will not be able to cross it. And therefore they started going for pilgrimage. Somebody went to Kedarnath, somebody to Bhardwar and things like that. And they lost track of the important obstacle and dominating that obstacle and intelligence on that obstacle. So a sense of complacency came in, and this is a killer, because if you don't have intelligence, don't keep the threat The threat existed. It was a huge force of Abdali. And if you don't keep that under your eyes, then that's not a happy situation. And that is why Abdali could sprung a strategic surprise on them. That is the case of anticipation and strategic patience. You see, when Abdali got them cut off, they were on the northern side, they couldn't reach Delhi, they couldn't get any support from the Deccan Plateau. So at that point of time, they had limited food reserves. And Abdali had a strategic patience. He could make out that these guys will not be able to sustain much. So he didn't attack. That let them starve, and then I'm going to, then let's see what happens. And certainly they got starved to disgust, and they were forced to attack when they were at the weakest edge. Then comes the question of the culmination point. There is a saying in military that you must capture your center of gravity before you reach your culmination point. Now, Marathas, when they got isolated, at that point of time, they had the center of gravity in their, should have gone in for attack in case they wanted to go for attack. But then when they got starved, they had actually crossed their culmination point. So that was, the timing was not right. Then comes the question of the logistic principle. As I mentioned, the non-combatants were strategic load, the logistic load. And then comes the system of caste system. There is an anecdote to say that Abdali, when he was saying that they were short of food, there were a whole lot of langars which were blowing, everybody was cooking for himself. He says, why don't they cook together? And his intelligence informers told him that they've got a caste system. The upper caste will not eat with the lower caste, etc., etc. Even when they were short of food, this caste system did not let them economize. And that's the reason why they were doing the way they were doing. And then Abdali was very sure that we will win because they are not united. They are not putting a united front. And the kings also did not put a united front. Now you come to the battle. Now in the battle, they had planned, okay, 7 battalions to the left. Sadashiv goes from the center. And there were certain other forces, Holkars and others who were supposed to exploit the success when they make an initial punch. The initial punch was made, an initial breach was made, but they couldn't exploit that because the guns were short of ammunition. They didn't get the fire support at the time when they wanted to. There was a poor coordination between RT infantry and cavalry, and so therefore all this happened. But then comes, all was not negative. There is a silver lining beyond, and the silver lining is that subsequently, when Sadashiv died, his son, his daughter was married to 6. His grandson, her grandson, in terms of Hari Singh Nalwa, who was a chieftain of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, subsequently went and captured Kabul. So we did get our glory back, and subsequently, even the Peshwas, they went and captured Delhi and dislodged everybody. So, but this remained for almost just about 2 odd years. But again, we were different, shall we say, kingdoms not synergizing with each other. And this unity this aspect of putting a united front against an aggressor, external aggressor, this didn't help. So that's why Wellesley, when he came, by then the British were already here, he also met the survivors of this and asked them, and he took up these weaknesses. And that's how he also strategized, and that's why we lost the British as well. It's believed that our soldiers, some of them who stayed in Panipat, although they changed their names, like you would have seen this Olympian Neeraj Chopra, Olympic gold medalist. He actually is a Maratha. By the caste, he is Chopre. But then all these Marathas who stayed put, they changed their surname to be one of them. So he became Chopra. But then the tales of their valor, they still are alive. And I'll finish here so that we can get adequate time for the other panelists.
Thank you very much indeed, Major General Asthana, for a very fascinating account of the Third Battle of Panipat and the lessons learned. You've taken a very analytic approach. I really thank you for that. And I'm pretty sure our audience will have a lot of questions, but let's wait for the questions and hear to all our distinguished speakers. And I have the pleasure of inviting Major General Dhruv Katoch, who is also associated with United Service Institution of India. And as I said earlier, my association with him goes back as early as 2008 when he was the director of clause and I used to publish some articles there. So General Katoch, the floor is yours, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanjee, my fellow panelists, and all the distinguished people who are watching. Let me give you my perspective of the way I see the events unfolding and the impact they've had on history. Now, when we come to the beginning of the 18th century, that is the time when you see Mughal power declining, as brought out. Actually, it wasn't that the Mughal power declined with the death of Aurangzeb. That was certainly there. But even during his final years, the Marathas were hammering the hell out of him. And he had been considerably weakened. All that happened was after his death, the empire started disintegrating. So we have the Marathas, the Maratha power on the ascendancy. We have the Mughals declining. We have the Europeans coming in. The East India Company came in 1600. We had the Europeans, we had the French, and we had the Portuguese. But when we look at the Maratha power, or whether it was the Mughal power, I think there is one thing which we need to understand. By and large, while the rule was in Delhi when the Mughal power was there, all the principalities, when you are looking at across, they used to pay a chauth. But by and large, they were independent. And their payment also, the tribute which they paid to the emperor also depended upon their capacity and the capacity of the emperor to extract it. So when they didn't wish to pay, then the emperor had to assemble an army and actually go there to force them to give it to him. And that was the same thing which was happening with the Marathas. They had their principalities, but from the Deccan, they were collecting chauth. From West Bengal, they were collecting chauth. And even when they captured Punjab, after that, they had no desire to stay there. So they came back and they left a governor there, Adina Beg. Now that I think was again, this was before the Third Battle of Panipat. Now that I think was again a strategic blunder because the Sikhs, while it was a Muslim majority area, that entire area was a Muslim majority area, but there was a very large percentage of Sikhs there who would have given him support. And he didn't make a Sikh ruler there. Had there been a Sikh governor, perhaps even there could have been a difference. Now, when we come back to this battle, I think it's very interesting to observe a few aspects of the battle. See the way the forces were positioned well before the battle. If the battle took place at Panipat, you find the forces of the Maratha forces to the north. They were well to the north. And you find Abdali actually moving towards Delhi. And when he starts moving towards Delhi, that was the time when the Marathas start moving south. Then Abdali stops his movement towards Delhi. He starts moving north, and then they face off at Panipat. So when this face off at Panipat takes place, we have a very odd situation. The Abdali's force cannot go back to Punjab and Afghanistan, and the Marathas can't come back south. So ultimately, if a war had to take place, this war had to be to the death. It had to be one way or the other. Now, at this point of time, Abdali wanted peace. He was really not interested in war. And it's very strange. Even the Marathas weren't interested in war. You see, the Maratha interest was confined to ensuring that the Mughal, the emperor remains as the emperor for whatever he was worth. And what Abdali was interested in was getting back his chauth from Punjab. So they tried to have an agreement, but unfortunately that agreement didn't work out. It was an unnecessary war. But it was fought and it was lost. Now the question is, why was this war lost? General Asthana has brought about, I think, one of the most valid points is, they moved with a very, very heavy load. Now, you can't move a field army, with about 200,000 supporters. You got an army of about 80,000 or so, right? 80,000 and 80 plus, say, 70 to 80,000 people. Incidentally, Abdali had 10,000 people more than him when you're looking at the force levels. So you have an army and you've got the number of supporters, you've got families there. The focus has shifted, because you want to do darshan in the temples, you want to carry out your holy days, you want to carry out your sacrifices. Now, that is not the way we do war. I think the focus had shifted. And finally, they got serious because once they started moving, once Abdali started moving, then they realized that, okay, perhaps we have to go to war. Then they tried to shed their load. But the problem came in now that even though they tried to shed the load and it was shed, but still the number of supporters, the non-combatants in that area was still too large. The bigger problem came in because they were so large and they could not get any rations from the north. The north was generally a Muslim-dominated area. They had already antagonized the Sikhs. So for him to say that I've got supply lines from the north didn't work. But for Abdali, he did something smarter. He had the support of all the local Muslim groups. So for him to get his supplies was not that much of a problem as it was for the Marathas. And I think this played a very major role ultimately in the defeat of the Maratha forces. The second point is, when you're looking at alliances, the Rajputs didn't come to help. The Jats didn't come to help. So all the non-Marathas, none of them came to the aid, or they were not part of the alliance of the Marathas. Now here, this I think was a significant weakness in the way they went about it. But when you look at Abdali, on the other hand, he did something smart. All the local Muslim Rajas actually, they aligned with him. And he had a much stronger alliance, and it was because of that stronger alliance that he could get more people into the battlefield. And his supply lines were relatively, we cannot say totally more secure, but they were relatively more secure than the Marathas. This is the second point. Actually, when the battle took place, he had an infantry, the Gardis, as the general has earlier mentioned, of 8,000 people. Now, these Gardis, they actually did a marvelous job. Absolutely fantastic job, and the Rohillas who were supporting the Afghani forces, they were literally massacred by the Gardis. This is the musketeers. Unfortunately, they just had about 8,000 of them. Now, had they had an additional lot of 8,000 people of these Gardis, most of the Marathas were on cavalry. And they didn't have this very essential component of the infantry on the ground. And had they had that additional 8,000 people or so, the battle would have tilted in their favor, despite everything else. So I think they lost out basically on this count also. On artillery, which I would like to talk about here, it is something, they had a heavy gun. Now, carrying that gun from point A to point B was a huge problem. But more importantly, they had a bigger shot. So when they had positioned those guns and when they were firing it onto the Maratha, onto the camps which had been made by the Abdali force, and please remember, these camps are not they are spread over kilometers, both in length and in depth. So because the charge was so heavy, it actually sailed over and didn't cause much damage. But the Abdali's artillery was far more effective in hitting these people. So in terms of artillery also, while it is correct that he had 200 guns, which was much more than what the Afghans had, on the ground per se, the impact of the artillery of Abdali's force was far greater than the impact of the Marathas. So on these two counts, I think they both lost out very heavily. Now, the battle took place in January, on the 14th of January. Now, all the time they knew that the battle had to take place. So why did you delay that battle? You should have actually gone in November. Now, they delayed that battle. I think when you're looking at a command decision, You cannot delay the battle to the point of time when you actually started starving and you got no food at all. For 3 days, the people were hungry. They had no food. Their horses were dying because they had no fodder. So why did you wait for 2.5 months? You should have actually gone in November. You had the chance to go in November. And had they gone in November, I think they would have won that battle again, regardless of any other circumstance. So here, I think it was a question of command decisions. For whatever reason, they thought that, okay, the Abdali's force can't survive. They were getting wrong information or whatever. But they had an opportunity of going in. They missed that opportunity. And I think that was a very serious strategic mistake. You know, when we're looking at Abdali's forces, he made very good use of 3 elements of his force. One was his musketeers, that was one. The second was his cavalry, and the third was his artillery. Now, he was a man, Abdali as a general, he coordinated these forces very well. Now, that level of coordination in the Maratha forces, unfortunately, was not there. I don't think the Marathas really understood the concept of foot infantry. They were much more onto the cavalry side. The artillery, they had already gone wrong. The shot was too big. But it didn't really work out for them. So here again, when we are looking at the combined forces, what we call today the all-arms concept, I think Abdali did a better show. He did a better show, and the result showed in the battlefield. Getting back onto the political side, you know, what was happening there at this time? The Marathas were actually, there were 4 major events taking place at that time. The Marathas were engaged in the north with the Abdali's forces. The Nizam was giving them trouble in the south. In the Deccan, Hyder Ali was giving them problems, and the British had actually already come and they had won the Battle of Plassey. So these were the 4 major forces which were going there. But I think the strategic blunder at the highest level made by the Peshwa himself, he actually chose to fight on 2 fronts. So he was fighting the Nizam's forces in the south. At the same time, he was fighting the war hadn't started, but the troops had been sent to fight Abdali on the north. So basically, for him, it became a 2-front war. Now, had they concentrated all their effort on one side, you could have dealt with the Nizam later. There was not much of a problem. But perhaps he thought that they could do both simultaneously. I think there was a gross underestimation of capacity and capability. Even when the war was taking place, there was a chance when, perhaps the Marathas, they could have actually cut the losses and withdrawn. But I think then the question of face came in that, okay, if we withdraw now, what do we do? What face do we show to our ruler? So they chose to fight. In the event, I don't think that was a very wise decision. They lost most of their men. 50% of the force they lost on the battlefield. A large percentage they lost when they were withdrawing. Because where they were withdrawing and through all those areas, especially where the Muslims were dominant, they took them in small pieces, and many of them died there. They didn't have any support. The Peshwa had realized at some point of time that they needed reinforcements. Now, by the time he realized it, I don't think he had the capacity to send them in time and space. But had the reinforcements started coming in much earlier, we would have had a totally different situation. We would have had the Marathas on the north, the Afghans on the other side, on the other side of Panipat, and further south would have been the Marathas again. Now, this chap would have been sandwiched. He would have surrendered. But that didn't take place. And ultimately, I think it was a matter of better generalship from the start of the battle till the end. Because this battle wasn't just fought on one day. It was fought in various small skirmishes over the previous 3 months. And during this period, I think Abdali exercised much greater control and much better generalship. Now, a few points which come up. Was this the reason that the British could actually come to India? Was this the reason that gave Britain their success? No, I really don't think so. You see, Britain had already won the Battle of Plassey in 1757. That's a different history altogether. Just a day after this battle, Pondicherry had fallen to them. They had defeated the French. And even in Bihar, there was this chap, Colonel Karnak. His forces defeated Shah Alam's forces there. And it took 3 battles with the Marathas subsequently for the British to really cement their power. So to say that had they won the battle, the Brits wouldn't have come in, I really don't know. Because the Marathas repeated the same mistakes time and time again, even with the battle with the Brits. They did not make alliances. But the Brits made alliances with each and every battle. They knew which way the wind is blowing. So they would get one Raja to fight off against the other Raja. And I think it was very stupid on the part of all the local Indian rulers to have done what they did, because ultimately they lost complete power. India was a strong country, but we lost power. And I think that is the most important lesson to learn. If we have to look back into history, how not to do things wrong. We need to have that strategic sense that, okay, things can go wrong, but we need to find out who is the common enemy. In this case, it was the Afghan ruler. Was it a necessary war? No, it was not a necessary war. After the war, Delhi went back. All that he wanted was his chauth from Punjab. He lost that also because the Sikh power came up. And then, of course, the Sikh power moved right into Afghanistan. So I don't think Abdali was interested in war. Marathas weren't interested in war. So you still go and fight something which really nobody is interested in. And we lose 60 to 70,000 men. The men really didn't make much of a difference because they recouped their losses very fast. Within 2 to 3 years, everything was back to normal. But they lost a very major part of their generalship. I think they lost credibility also. And the Brits realized that they could divide the Indians. And I think that is something which we must learn even today. Don't be divided, because if you are divided, you will be defeated in detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Major General Dhruv Katoch. Consistently, the message we are getting, the lesson learned is united we stand, divided we fall. And that has been the history of military battles in various, epochs as far as Indian history is concerned. I have the distinguished pleasure of inviting now our last and the third distinguished speaker, Colonel Harjeet Singh. He is a military historian and a military, intellectual. He has written more than 50 books. And in fact, he has written on Battle of Panipat, Cannons versus Elephants. And that's the book I was saying that it is, not in print anymore, and people are just making money by trying to sell whatever remaining copies are there. So I'm sure this would be the icing on the cake. Let's invite Colonel Harjeet Singh. Colonel, please unmute yourself. You're muted at this point in time. So please unmute yourself before you start your talk.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Adityanjee. At the outset, you mentioned that this book, Cannons vs. Elephants, is not available. But I spoke to my publisher and he's said that it's now available through Amazon USA. So I think there are a few copies available. Though it surprises me that within 10 years, this book has gone out of print. Anyway, be that as it may, what caused me to write this book is what I'll first, go over. It's not that I had answers. It was that I had more questions as to what actually happened. And the questions arose in a casual trip to Panipat when I stopped and asked somebody, where did this battle take place? Or these 3 battles took place. And very surprisingly, very few people know, even in Panipat itself, as to where these battles took place. And that surprised me that all of India, it's part of our history that these 3 great battles of Panipat, three one-day battles, which changed the course of history so much. And the people in Panipat do not know about it. There's a reason. Till independence, Panipat was a Muslim town. It was a gated or a fortified city. It had 13 gates. and it was a predominantly Muslim town. It is only after partition and when these Muslims, most of them migrated to Pakistan, and Hindu migrants from Pakistan came and settled down in Panipat. And then the demography changed to some extent. And also, there's nothing left of the old fortifications in Panipat, because when these refugees came, they broke or took whatever bricks where they could get hold of from anywhere and construct their own homes. So that was one issue. The next thing I want to bring out is that today, if you go and try and see the battles of Panipat, battlefields, you cannot. At least the first two. The first battle, which took place between Babur and Ibrahim Lodi, if anybody travels in India from the Punjab and going towards Delhi, now of course there's a flyover all through Panipat town, and on the left of the or east of the flyover is the Panipat bus stand. And the first battle took place just behind the bus stand. So it's all built up area today. You really cannot analyze the terrain. The second battle between Hemu and Bairam Khan, or Akbar, if you want to put it that way, that battle took place. There's a railway line south of Panipat going from Panipat to Jind. And just south of that railway line is where the second battle took place. And that has also become to a large extent built up area. So you cannot analyze. But the third battle, you can analyze very well, because those villages, like Sonali, Ograkheri, all that, they are still existing today, though much more built up. But the changes which have taken place are mainly in the alignment of the Yamuna River. Today, because of these dams which have been constructed in the upper reaches of the Yamuna River, the course of the river has shifted 3 to 5 kilometers eastwards. So the terrain has changed that much, and there's much more space today between Panipat town and the Yamuna River as against what was obtaining over there. The next question which people normally ask is, why did these battles all take place in Panipat? And we have this great expression of the Panipat syndrome. This expression, which was coined by Air Commodore Harjeet Singh, who was heading the Institute of Defense Studies, where he said that the rulers in Delhi woke up to a problem only when the problem came on their heads at Panipat. Till that time, right from the Hindu Kush mountains, when these invaders came, nobody bothered for it. But there was a reason for that also. If you see invaders who came in those days, today we see Punjab as a level plain. It was not so flat a terrain, or in the sense of going and maneuverability for forces. Anybody who's crossed the Hindu Kush through these 4 passes, he had the options available to him. From the Khyber, he would try and cross the 5 rivers of Punjab as close to the hills as possible. Because then, closer to the hills, the rivers were not so wide. So crossing them was easy. And navigation was also easy, that you just kept the hills to your left and you carried on till you reached Yamuna Nagar, where you reached the Yamuna, and from there you started moving down south to reach Delhi. Or the other option was, if you cross from the side of the Bolan Pass, then you have to cross the Indus only, one river, and reach somewhere near Firozpur, come to Bathinda, Hisar, and then you could come to Delhi. In between this area, which today is now level plain, that area was called Lakhi Jungle, and the lakhs of trees were over there. And it was, most of this was kikar trees, or not rough kind of trees. Robbers, brigands, those kind of people used to be thriving in that area, and there was a lot of wildlife. Babur himself says he hunted rhinoceros around the Indus, and they were hunting tigers and lions in the area of the Lakhi jungle. So today, a person, when he sees that terrain, he cannot imagine it as to what it would have been at that point of time, 2 centuries earlier. Now, coming to the battle itself, what intrigued me was why did these two forces, the Afghans who came from the north were facing north, and the Marathas who came from the south were facing south? Well, those have been covered by the previous two speakers to some extent. But the Panipat plain was the only level area where a pitched battle could be fought. Beyond, north of that, as I mentioned, this all was a difficult terrain, or this Lakhi jungle, and south of it was all built up area, and Delhi and other things were there. Now, the other fact is that this third battle did not involve the Mughals at all. They were more or less on the way out, so they were very weak. They were relying on these Najibullah and others who were Shah Wali Khan, Nizamul Mulk, all these others who are, trying to prop them up. And it surprises me as to why did the Marathas not think of deposing the Mughals at that point of time and taking over the throne of Delhi? But there's a rationale for that also. Because the Marathas also were not interested in ruling this area. So yes, Raghunath Rao had gone right up to Atak, and he said we watered our horses in the Indus before coming back. But they were interested in Sadeshmukhi and Chauth. They were interested in money. And the Peshwa Balaji Rao had laid down that war must pay for the war. So you have to get money. And he gave no funds to Sadashiv Rao Bhau to prosecute this campaign. And he said, you earn and gain whatever money you can and send the money back to Pune. The only cash which he said could be given was 2 hundis with the merchants from Indore, which he said you can encash if you really need them. Otherwise, I prefer that you don't even use this money and just get whatever you can. So, and that is one of the reasons why the silver canopy in the Diwani Arm in the Red Fort was brought down by Sadashiv Rao and melted and sold for 9 lakh rupees. His actual expenses for a month were 6 lakh rupees. So he needed that much more resources to get it. You cannot fight a war like that. Economy is today a great factor in conducting any campaign. Now, the point has been brought out that how do we know the records of this war? The person who wrote this account of this battle was Kachiraj Pandit. Kachiraj Pandit was the private secretary of Nawab Shujatullah of Awadh, who was supposed to have come onto the side of the Marathas. And Shujatullah's mother had told him also that you fight on the side of the Marathas because they are from India. But religious aspects came into play, or I would say the persuasion powers of Najib Khan, the Rohilla ruler from Saharanpur area. Najibabad is still today known after him, who persuaded him to, in a meeting on the banks of the Ganges at today, what is Farrukhabad, where they had this meeting and he convinced him to join on the side of the Muslims. Yet, a large portion of the Awadh rulers were these Gosains, Hindu soldiers, brave soldiers, but they also had to fight on the side of the Afghan Confederacy. So there's a question now, allies have been brought out. The Jats had been alienated by Sadashiv Rao Bhau, that he did not listen to the Jat rulers at Bharatpur. The Rajputs, in any case, were not with him. The Sikhs were also, in a way, alienated. Ana Singh, the ruler of Patiala, did agree to provide them some supplies, but those supplies were to be on payment. He did not give them free. And the area of the Doab, that is between the Ganges and the Yamuna, that he had, the Peshwa had his own governor there, Moropant, who was to take the revenue and keep sending it back to Pune. Now he is killed. He is not a military man, he is a civil governor. So he did not have, and if you expect him to provide you manpower, he didn't have the expertise to get hold of people to fight on the side of the Marathas. So that was one aspect. Another thing we got to see is that actually the battle arena was alien to both sides. To the Afghans, it was definitely alien because it was India, and northern India was absolutely alien to the Marathas also. They had little clue about what actually is involved, the climate, the terrain of Punjab, because in Maharashtra, where they were used to fighting, it was all hilly terrain, guerrilla tactics and other things could work. But when you come to the flat plains up north, and the climate and weather being what it is, they were not in tune with it to see that we can fight in keeping with that. The aspects of allies have been brought out earlier by the previous speakers, but I would like to mention one more aspect of how they did it without money. The only troops who were actually being paid were Ibrahim Khan Gardi's Telugu troops. The remainder were all Holkar, Scindia, others had their own people, and they were responsible to pay their own troops. And then you had these freebooters, these Pindaris, who used to accompany the military expeditions and loot whatever they could and make much of it. So, if you see, it's been brought out, no help from the Sikhs, the Jats, the Rajputs, or the Awadhi people. So that was one aspect we brought out. Kashiraj Pandit's book is written in Persian. It had to be translated by me to get the English version, and then it becomes very clear the kind of diplomacy which took place before the actual battle start. So that period of the siege, diplomacy would have had a chance if it had been conducted by a man who was not as arrogant as Bhau to bring things to their logical conclusion. The people who benefit the most from the battle were the British, because northern India had weakened itself. The Mughals were as it is weak. The Marathas were attenuated in their fighting capability for some time. And up north, in any case, the situation was a bit different with the Punjab. But if you want to draw lessons, the major lessons were learnt or written down sometime in 1803, when the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, who was still in India at that point of time, he organized a study of this battle and to see what lessons they could learn. So the major lessons he sort of wrote down in that study group report, which is available now in England, is that civilians should never be allowed to mingle with the military in the conduct of a campaign. First aspect, professional soldiers must be kept apart. Then there's a need to equip troops properly. One cannot do it in half measures. The aspect of the need for infantry has been well brought out by General Katoch, that there was need besides the cavalry element. In any case, the horses of the Marathas were not as sturdy as the Khorasani horses which the Afghans had. The next thing they noted was the aspect of the large number of casualties which took place in this war. And they felt that there's a need now for medical resources to be made available, or teams of doctors or somebody to be present as part of the major complement of the force to look after casualties. That was another lesson which was brought up. Then how the Marathas had allowed their supply lines to be endangered. Lines of communication, logistics must be secured if you want to conduct a successful campaign. This has been brought out earlier. I just thought I'd mention this. Then, if you want to launch troops into battle, training is essential. You cannot go into any fighting without training. And here we find, yes, the Afghans had been well trained because they had accompanied him as part of the force right from their homeland and coming here. And through the resources available through Najib Khan and in the Rohilla force, again, which was well trained. Whereas the only well-trained complement in the Maratha side was this Kardis, nobody else. One more important lesson, today we understand it, if you see what is happening in the Ukraine or anything, diplomacy is always better than fighting. And diplomacy should have been taken to its logical conclusion. That was not allowed to be carried through. If you read through Kashiraj Pandit's account, well, I would concede the fact that because he was the private secretary to the Nawab of Awadh, Shujatullah, and his loyalty was towards Shujatullah, and since Shujatullah had joined the Afghans, so he, in his accounts, is biased towards how good the Afghans were, and he highlights more than anything else the arrogance of Sadashiv Rao Bhau and the divisive formations of the Marathas and their confederacy. So that was one more essential point. The caste system has been well brought out by General Asthana, that has been the bane of India. And so you could not have, if people are going to cook their own food separately in separate kitchens, there's no cohesiveness in a force. The last, point I would like to bring out is, well, one more lesson was lack of reserves. The Marathas had no reserves to influence the battle. Whereas Abdali still had reserves. At one stage when he was feeling the pressure of the attack down the center, he rounded up all troops through his military police and he said, go there and execute anybody who's trying to run away from the battlefield and push everybody forward. And he had that reserve. And the reserve was based on this camel-based artillery which he had, the Shutarnals. So the camels gave that much more elevation in the battlefield of say 5, 6, 7 or whatever feet you want to able to fire onto the Marathas who are attacking them. And it is only the Afghan troops through their training, they could throw up breastworks and dig and carry on in the battlefield to save themselves, which is something which was not there on the Maratha side. And the last point, and the most important point, which both my earlier panelists have spoken about, is lack of unity. India basically defeats itself. It doesn't need an external power to come and do it if we are going to keep on going hammer and tongs at each other and only then think that we can emerge successful. We have the willpower, we have all the resources. We just need this element of unity. And this time and again through history, the lesson has come out. I don't need to elaborate on that further. I'll finish here. Now, if there are any questions, we'll all try and respond.
Thank you very much indeed, Colonel Harjeet Singh, for a very analytic, presentation about the lessons learned from this historical war. And I think these lessons hold true for today's context also. And all three of our distinguished speakers talked about this lack of unity, divisiveness, and internal strife. Why Jats? Why Rajputs? Why Sikhs were not willing to be allies with Marathas had to do with previous campaigns. And I'm glad that you mentioned the word Pindaris, because these were the determinants of lack of alliances. So there were a lot of things that could have been done, should have been done, but were not done. And important is that we learn from those mistakes in today's context. So I think General Katoch had talked about, war on two fronts, having war with the Nizam and with the Afghans at the same time. And again, we are in the same situation. We are having a 2.5 front war going on. And I think these similarities are there to learn and, formulate a more coherent, military doctrine to deal with these current challenges. So we will start taking questions now to all our speakers. So the first question which is there from Manish Maheshwari is, was there lack of quote unquote define the enemy?
Excuse me, lack of what?
Who the enemy is. Was there a confusion about who the enemy is?
May I start with that?
Go ahead, General Asthana.
Okay. External enemy, I don't think there was any doubt. But recognizing internal enemy, I think that problem was there. And that problem continues to remain even today. So this, in a nutshell, I think in one line, I can sum up, yes, the entire, whatever he has written on the chat box, I totally agree with that. Couldn't agree more. Yes, there was a lack of clarity in identifying the internal enemy and internal weaknesses. Somebody is also talking about Atma Bodh. Yes, certainly. Knowing the strength of the enemy and weaknesses of our own is very important, instead of gloating over the strength of ourselves and weaknesses of the enemy. So I think that was certainly these two things were there. Others may like to add on.
Other speakers, members of the panel, if they want to opine. General Katoch, you are muted, please. Yeah.
I'll just go once more. You see, let us take the situation at that point of time. The chauth had to be given to the Maratha ruler. Now, the Rajputs had to pay it, the Jats had to pay it, Punjab was paying it. And nobody wanted to pay that chauth, I mean, that is the whole point. So when this battle took place, people just, at least these fellows stood out. They said, okay, ab Delhi to wapas chala jayega, but we will strengthen our position. So nobody was thinking of it from a holistic point of view, because India was not a nation state even then. You were small little principalities. Whoever had the power, you actually went in. You expanded your kingdom. You lost the power, the kingdom reduced. Today, of course, the situation is different, but the central problem still remains the same. You see, when we are looking at the present political situation, take away the states. You have political parties today who will work against the national interest if we go to war. I particularly am very scared to go to war, because you will have a very major political party who claims to be the grand old party working against your interest. You will have the communists working against your interests. So those are the things. I mean, regardless of the fact that we are a nation state now and there is one army, one armed force, and it is a very well integrated armed force, and we can take on those two fronts. We can take on the half front also. So 2.5 fronts, in my personal view, is not the problem. My problem is the last half front. I call it three-front war. The last half front is the fifth columnist within the country.
Yeah.
And I really don't know how the armed forces are going to tackle that, because that the people of India need to tackle. It is not armed forces don't go to war. The country goes to war. The nation goes to war. And I think it is up to the nation to tackle that last half front, the fifth columnist within. The armed forces will do the rest. We'll take on 2.5 and we'll win.
I'm glad that you brought this issue, although in this forum we don't try to go into party political issues. But when it comes to the survival of the nation and strategic threats to the existence of the nation, there's no holy cow. There's no holy cow. And if we have to discuss and eliminate the internal threats in order to deal with the external aggressor, that would be like a lesson from all these previous wars. So I will go on to the next question. I'm trying to address one question from each person. There are a lot of comments from, but they are not questions. So I will just move on to the next question. It is from Vijay Nilekani, and the question reads, was an inflated sense of greatness responsible for overreach and hubris that led to the defeat? The same thing happened with the fall of Vijayanagar Empire to the southern, sultans in Deccan area. So again, any of the three panelists, if you would like to address this question, please do.
Yes, I would go along with the comments which have been passed, because the point was this level of hubris was there. The Marathas, they did think that they have reached a particular level of preparedness and strength in their forces, and they could go there, especially because of the expedition of Raghunath Rao, the brother of the Peshwa, who had reached up to Atak. And the only point of contention was that while Raghunath Rao had reached up to there, he did not send any money back to, because he had a conflict with the Sikhs or the division of the spoils in the Punjab. And so he had to, finally, after his 2 years of campaigning, he had to go back. Sadashiv Rao was his cousin brother. And Sadashiv Rao was an even more arrogant person who took him to task. And he said, you have not brought any money back. What was the idea of your carrying out this campaign? And so when he was delegated the authority to be in charge of the army, though the nominal son of the Peshwa was, the son of the Peshwa was made the nominal commander. But the fact of the matter is, he agreed that he'll go with no funds because he thought, I will get the funds. I will get all the money to prosecute the campaign successfully. That sense of overconfidence does not behove any military commander who thinks he can fight without the kind of proper resources financially or logistically to think he can live off the land with such a large force. That was, I think, their denouement.
Anyone else from our distinguished panel would like to make a comment on this question?
Oh, I totally agree with Colonel Harjeet.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'll move on to the next question, and it is from Mr. Ashutosh Gupta from Chicago. And it's a similar kind of question. Was lack of full-heartedness of the Peshwa rulership for the war was a factor in this outcome?
Again, this
This
part
has
the
been-
same answer, but the fact of the matter is that their success in against the Nizam and in the Deccan area, that kind of military campaign was totally different up north. And that, I do not know why Raghunath Rao, when he had fought in the Punjab earlier, failed to provide the kind of feedback to the Peshwa as to what it involves and what needs to be done to reorganize the forces. Of course, the fact remains that Sadashiv Rao Bhau had won this famous battle at Udgir, which sort of gave him such an aura that he could defeat the Nizam's forces. And now he had this great trained Gardi force, which now could help him overcome these other things. But as you mentioned, it was just a hubris. We thought that now we can do more with less.
And also to add on, there was a ego problem between the two. So certainly the ego clash also did not let the previous guy brief Sadashiv. So apparently these two things certainly made a lot of difference. And this was actually shown subsequently even when he wanted the alliance and couldn't get any.
Also, I mean, there, Kashiraj Pandit in one case, he makes this remark in his diary that in his presence, he was hearing Holkar, Malhar Rao Holkar, giving some advice to Bhau about certain things. Now, again, the caste system things comes in. Holkar was a dhanger, a shepherd by caste, though he has now come up to that authority. And Bhau makes this comment, I don't need advice from dhangars on how to fight a war. So its persona, his attitude was, in a way, contributing to the fact that he was royalty or they were much superior in thinking and he doesn't require to have a goat herd or this Jat ruler or this Holkars to give him any sort of advice. The only advice he should take was from Ibrahim Khan Gardi, because he recognized that Gardi was a professional soldier. And the Gardi component was of under Ibrahim Khan was the only component which was actually paid. The others had to live off the land.
I think that's a very, very important lesson for contemporary issue that, there has to be absence of divisiveness based on narrow considerations, whether that is caste, region, language, all those kind of things. I'm going to go on to the next question, and it is from Mr. Vivek Sinha from New York. And the question is, in lieu of the analysis and to counter the fifth column, should more emphasis of history between 1700 to 1825 be taught and discussed to make people aware of the issues?
May I?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Please.
You see, when I'm talking of the fifth columnist, I don't think there's a problem within the people of India. My problem is really with the way politics is played to get into power, and that politics is divisive. The problem lies there that even if there is a war, the people will say, okay, if this party loses, if we lose the war, then we'll get back into power by throwing this party out. Now, that is where the problem really lies of divisiveness. It is not amongst the people of India. I don't find that divisiveness. Now, I've been through all parts of the country. But then amongst political parties, which I've been pleading every time I go on television, every time, I said on few issues, there should be unanimity. And national security is one such issue. There are enough issues to fight your political battles on, which must be fought. I mean, no party can say that I shouldn't be criticized. That is an open game. But on issues which affect national security, it is my opinion that all political parties must speak in one. That is where we require the unity. The people of India, we are united. I don't think there's a problem there, but that's my view.
Very nice. Any of the other two panelists would like to make a comment?
Certainly, as far as I totally agree with what General is saying, and as far as the fifth columnist is concerned, the importance was there earlier, the importance exists today as well, and fifth columnists are being utilized by everyone, including our neighbor to the west, and neighbor to the east utilized a little earlier, maybe 1 or 2 decades back, and may still be trying to utilize it now. So fifth columnist certainly have a role, and in various wars. That's why we call it now a hybrid war, because there is a conventional element and there is also fifth columnist which are being utilized. So that is certainly applicable even today. And my last point is adding to what General Katoch has said. There is a need, perhaps, for more awareness on these issues, because people should be aware as to why we lost. We get into debates on very, not debates, I would say, unnecessarily arguments. And in democracy, certainly the right of speech at times is misused. And this right of speech, under the garb of right of speech, we sometimes cross the line, which is against the national interest and national security. So that, I think, to tell them as to what grave consequences it can have, I think these battles are very good reminders. And these battles certainly should be studied, should be showcased, and the lessons certainly should be brought out. And in that context, I think I must compliment that you chose a very good subject. And I must compliment CSA. In fact, I was speaking to somebody that I will be speaking on this subject. He mentioned one of the very senior officer who also happened to me on the panel yesterday on some other issue. He said, yes, that is a very important panel, important discussion. And I think people must realize the importance of this. Thank you so much for picking up this issue.
Lesson which has not been, covered in the presentation so far is the importance of intelligence.
Yeah.
You need to know not only about your opposing forces, but the total threat perception which exists in the environment in a particular area. And that analysis was not done by the Marathas to see as to what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what opportunities exist, and what are those threats as a SWOT analysis. They had not done it. And so they took the situation as it comes. If they had sort of done a deeper analysis, they would have known all the threats which are existing in that environment of the battle arena. And perhaps if they had taken adequate measures, they may have accrued some dividends from that venture of theirs.
Very much. I will allow one more question before we conclude. And although this question has been answered by our speakers, but it is a direct question from Vasant Verma. Was Peshwai more about collecting chauts and less about the reign of the Maratha Empire?
The principle of Chauth and Sardeshmukhi had been laid down by Shivaji at the outset. And that became the raison d'etre, the rationale, the complete system of how the Marathas came to power was to make war pay for war. That they would not denude any of their financial resources from their empire. So, if that was at the back of their mind, then that mindset went, I think, beyond what should have been logical to try and see that let us think in terms of empire building and making friends rather than applying everything back to Pune for their own benefit. So, if uh, anybody would like to look at it, northern India was a very nice area for gaining of resources. And if they had nurtured the population over there, perhaps they could have gone and got greater dividends. Because as I said, the Jats, the Rajputs, Sikhs, Awadis, Rohillas, everybody was against them.
The other speakers, if they want to comment before we close.
No, I'm with Colonel Harjeet on this totally.
Say that this has been very educational roundtable discussion with our distinguished panelists. And it's important to revisit the history and learn those lessons to the today's context. And that's why I chose this particular topic, because it was an inflection point in the history of India. And if that particular war had been dealt with by the Marathas and the outcome had been different, we may have had a different trajectory. Having said that, could have been, should have been, all those things are moot point because history is what it is. But of course, there's a famous saying by George Santayana: those who fail to learn from the lessons of history are condemned to repeat it. And I think we see this kind of situation in India, that despite all these lessons about divisiveness, sort of supping with the devil or sleeping with the enemy, or you may use the word Jaichand syndrome, people still do not learn. And as has been said, that the fifth columnist and the party political battles have certainly taken the overtones of treachery and sedition. And I think that is the sad part of contemporary situation. So our hope at Council for Strategic Affairs is that these kind of roundtable discussions would be educational. They will raise the awareness, and it will also be a catalyst for, changing the mindsets. There was a saying that the politics must cease where the land ends, where the water begins. And I think we are seeing in most of the democratic countries, not just India, but other countries also, that is really not true or does not hold true. And the adversarial forces or enemy forces take advantage of that. Before I formally close, I want to make a couple of announcements. Our next event by Council for Strategic Affairs is a distinguished lecture by Lieutenant General V.K. Saxena on drone swarms and their security implications, because in the modern warfare, drones have become an important aspect. So that would be our next sort of event. I also want to thank all our esteemed speakers who have given us a lot of knowledge and wisdom and lessons to be implemented. I'm thankful to all our audience, whether they are from New York, Chicago, or New Delhi or Noida. It's an honor to have you participate in our forums. Please remember that all our events are recorded and we have a YouTube channel. So if you want to go and listen to the previous episodes of Roundtable Discussion and Distinguished Lecture Series, you can access those things now, and this event will also be available on our YouTube channel. Lastly, I have to thank a few people who are my right and left hands, pillar of support for Team Council for Strategic Affairs. They generally remain on the background, but their contribution is equally important. They are Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, Mr. Ankush Bhandari, and Mr. Rajiv Verma. They have been a pillar of support for a long time. Because of their help, we can continue to do these, events over a period of time. I will just want to make one comment that yes, we learn from lessons of history, but also, there are still communities in Haryana, which General Asthana mentioned. And this community is called Road Marathas. They are in 6 districts of Haryana, spread over 250 villages, and they are about 1 million. They had to live in deception after the defeat because Ahmad Shah Abdali soldiers would go and hunt them down. So although 40,000 were killed on single day battle, but there were remaining at least 500 Maratha soldiers who hid in the jungles and took refuge there and then blended with the population, and their descendants are the Road Maratha community. It's also important to realize that this community has not given on their ancestors, and there is a kind of gathering, annual gathering on January 14th every year in Panipat, where Road Maratha descendants of the Maratha soldiers actually visit and memorialize their ancestors. I think maybe a war museum in Panipat, looking into the military history of all the battles of Panipat would be educational to our current generation so that we continue to learn lessons from those 3 battles and impact they had on history of India. And as I again said, could have done that, should have done that, all those things are there. Past is past, but we can always change the present and the future, learning from those mistakes and learning the strategic and military lessons. So with those comments, I'm going to end this roundtable discussion. Thank you everyone for participating in it, and we shall meet in 2 weeks' time for a distinguished lecture series. Namaskar.
Thank
Namaskar.
Thank you.
you. Thank you.